Farm owner invites his worker to an important auction with the intention, but everyone was shocked when the worker does. Richard Montgomery, a ruthless tycoon, is about to execute his most diabolical plan: to humiliate and destroy Sam, a simple cowboy who knows every inch of the farm. But when Sam makes an unexpected move, the tables turn completely. With rising tensions, hidden agendas, and unexpected alliances, this is not a typical power struggle. Who will emerge victorious in a duel where the past holds the key to the future? Richard Montgomery was a respected name in Austin, Texas. Owner of one of the largest farms in the region, he was known for his ambition and business acumen. His lands stretched for miles, and the annual cattle auction on his property attracted investors and agricultural magnates from across the country. But behind his facade of a ruthless businessman, there was a cunning plan in the making. Richard was driven by an insatiable need for power and control, traits he had inherited from his father, a man who had built the farm with the same fierce determination. However, Richard was not content with merely maintaining his father's legacy. He wanted to expand it, modernizing the farm and turning it into an empire. Anything or anyone who stood in his way would be eliminated. Sam Jenkins, a dedicated cowboy, had worked on Richard's farm for over 2 decades. He knew every inch of the land, every animal, and was beloved by all the workers. Despite being a simple man, Sam had a deep knowledge of cattle management, something that Richard, with his modern and technocratic vision, considered outdated and obsolete. To Richard, Sam represented the past, an obstacle to the modernization and expansion he so desperately sought. In recent months, Richard began to feel that Sam's presence was becoming bothersome. He saw the respect the other workers had for Sam and feared it would weaken his authority. Furthermore, Richard planned to introduce new, more mechanized methods of farming, less reliant on manual labor, a change he knew Sam would not support. The tension between the two men was growing silently, like a storm about to break. Then Richard had a Machiavellian idea. The annual cattle auction was approaching, and he decided it would be the perfect moment to get rid of Sam once and for all. He planned to invite him to the event, making it seem like a goodwill gesture, but with the true intention of publicly humiliating him, thus forcing him to leave the farm on his own. Richard imagined the pleasure he would feel seeing Sam destroyed, his dignity crushed in front of everyone present. When Richard invited Sam to the auction, he did so casually, as if it were a mere formality. "Sam, I'd like you to be at this year's auction. I think it's important for all our employees to see how business is conducted at such an important event," Richard said with a fake smile. Behind that smile, there was a perverse satisfaction at the thought of what was to come. Sam, though suspicious, accepted the invitation. He knew something wasn't right, but he also knew he needed to protect what he had built over the years. He didn't want to see the farm he had dedicated his life to be transformed into something he didn't recognize. Moreover, Sam had a family to support, and losing his job was not an option. Despite the anxiety he felt, he kept his head held high and decided to face whatever Richard was planning. The days leading up to the auction were marked by a silent tension. The other workers noticed that something was different, but no one dared to comment. Sam, meanwhile, was mentally preparing for what was to come. He knew Richard didn't value him, but he was determined to face whatever was planned. The night before the auction, Sam had trouble sleeping. He tossed and turned in bed, worried about the future. The shadows of the night seemed to swallow his thoughts, making them even heavier. He thought of Martha, his wife, and his children, John and Emily, who depended on his work. Sam knew he couldn't fail. For them, he needed to stand strong. Finally, the day of the auction arrived. Richard's farm was filled with visitors, all dressed in their finest attire, ready to spend large sums of money. Sam, with his worn cowboy hat and leather boots dirty with soil, stood out in the crowd of businessmen and investors. But he kept his head held high, determined not to be intimidated. He knew he was walking into a battle, and he was ready to fight. The auction began promptly at noon, with the Texan sun shining brightly over Richard's property. Visitors settled into the wooden chairs set up outdoors, while the auctioneers took their positions on the makeshift stage. The atmosphere was one of anticipation, with all eyes on the high-quality cattle lots that would be offered. But for Sam, the weight of the event was not just in the cattle. It was in the clash he knew would come with Richard. Sam felt Richard's piercing gaze on him the entire time. The farm owner moved among the guests, greeting and exchanging words with the most influential, while occasionally casting a disdainful glance at Sam. It was clear that he was waiting for the right moment to execute his plan. Richard felt a sick satisfaction seeing Sam isolated among the magnates, like a lamb about to be sacrificed. As the bidding progressed and the prices rose, Sam remained silent, carefully observing every move. He knew the animals like no one else, knew their characteristics, their temperaments, and, most importantly, their true value. It was knowledge accumulated over years of hard work, something Richard's money could never buy. But today, that knowledge seemed like a burden. He knew Richard would use it against him. Finally, the moment Richard had been waiting for arrived. When the auctioneer announced the next lot, Richard stepped forward and, with a casual but audible tone for all, said, "Sam, why don't you place a bid on this lot? After all, you know these animals better than anyone. It would be interesting to see your opinion translated into a value." A hush fell over the crowd, and all eyes turned to Sam. He felt the weight of the trap Richard had set. It was evident that the boss wanted to embarrass him, knowing that a simple cowboy like him could not financially compete with the powerful investors present. Sam looked at Richard, who cast him a challenging, almost cynical look, as if already predicting Sam's humiliation. Sam took a deep breath, feeling his heart race. He knew this was the decisive moment. He had thought long and hard about what he would do if put in this situation and had made a decision that could change everything. With a steady gaze, he raised his hand and declared, "I bid $50,000. A murmur of shock rippled through the crowd like a wave. Richard was stunned, his eyes wide with disbelief. How could Sam, a simple cowboy, make such a high offer? For a brief moment, Richard imagined that Sam was joking, but the serious look on the man's face proved otherwise. The auctioneer, clearly surprised, hesitated for a moment before regaining his professional composure. "We have a bid of $50,000 from Mr. Sam Jenkins. Does anyone offer more?" The room was in absolute silence. The investors, still stunned by Sam's audacity, didn't know how to react. Some looked to Richard, waiting for him to intervene, but the farm owner seemed lost in his own thoughts, trying to process what had just happened. With no other bids being made, the auctioneer finally brought down the gavel. "Sold for $50,000 to Sam Jenkins." The surprise and shock were palpable in the air. Sam, for his part, remained calm, though he felt a slight tremor in his hands. He knew this was only the beginning of a long battle. Inside, Sam felt a mix of relief and apprehension. He had taken the first step, but he knew Richard would not take it lightly. Richard finally regained his composure, but his expression was one of pure anger. He approached Sam, trying to keep his voice low but unable to hide the fury in his words. "How dare you? Where did you get that money, Jenkins?" Sam looked Richard straight in the eye, his tone calm but firm. "I knew my presence here was meant to be a public humiliation, Richard, but, contrary to what you think, I have more value than I appear. And now that's clearer than ever." At that moment, Richard realized he had underestimated Sam. What he had planned as an easy trap was turning into a much more complicated game, a game in which he might not have complete control. The feeling of losing power was something Richard was not used to, and it filled him with an even deeper anger. Sam, on the other hand, knew he had crossed a line. There was no turning back. He had publicly challenged Richard, and now he had to be prepared for the consequences. As he left the auction, Sam felt the eyes of everyone on him. some in surprise, others in respect. But, above all, he felt the weight of what was to come. After Sam's impressive bid, the auction continued, but the atmosphere had changed completely. The event, once a display of the financial power of the major investors, was now marked by the surprising action of the cowboy. Whispers and speculations spread throughout the venue as eyes followed Sam, trying to decipher how he had come up with such a sum. Richard, on the other hand, struggled to contain his fury. He withdrew from the center of the auction, trying to figure out how to respond to the affront he had just suffered. His mind raced, searching for explanations and, more importantly, a way to expose Sam. Richard couldn't accept that one of his employees had surpassed his expectations and, worse, in public. It was a blow to his pride and authority. Meanwhile, Sam kept a low profile, though he felt the weight of every gaze on him. He knew his action would cause shockwaves, but he was prepared to deal with the consequences. Years of hard work and dedication had taught him to be resilient. Moreover, he knew he now had a powerful card up his sleeve: the inheritance he had recently received from a distant relative. The story of the inheritance was something Sam had kept secret, even from his own family. He had always been a modest man, preferring the simplicity of rural life. When the relative's lawyer approached him, Sam initially didn't believe the luck that fate had brought him. The fortune wasn't immense, but it was enough to change his life and, now, to protect the farm he loved so much from Richard's hands. As the last lots were auctioned, Richard retreated to his makeshift office in the main house. There, he made a few calls, activating his contacts and demanding answers. He needed to know where Sam had gotten that money and, more importantly, how he could use it against him. It wasn't long before he received a call from one of his trusted lawyers. "Richard," the lawyer began cautiously, "I did some digging into Sam Jenkins, and indeed he recently received an inheritance. It seems that a distant great-uncle, with whom he had no contact, left him a considerable sum of money. This isn't illegal, but there's something more." Richard gripped the phone tightly. "What else? Speak up." The lawyer hesitated for a moment, aware that the information he was about to reveal would change everything. "The relative, from what I discovered, was a partner of your father when the farm was founded. They had a partnership agreement that, over time, was ignored by your family. Legally, Sam could have rights to a portion of the property." Richard felt a chill run down his spine. The idea that Sam could have some control over his lands was unacceptable. He had spent his entire life expanding the farm, modernizing it, and now all of that was threatened by a cowboy he had always despised. Back at the auction, Sam was about to leave when Richard reappeared, with a cold and calculating expression. He approached Sam, who was talking to some of the other workers. "Sam, I'd like to have a word with you. Now." Sam nodded, aware that this confrontation was inevitable. He followed Richard to the main house, where they were greeted by a tense silence. Richard closed the door behind him and turned to Sam, his voice carrying a threatening calm. "I think you have something to explain to me, Sam." Sam crossed his arms, looking Richard directly in the eye. "I have nothing to hide, Richard. I received an inheritance, and I decided to use it to protect what I value." Richard snorted, irritated by the simplicity of the answer. "And this story that you might have rights over my farm? Do you think you can just show up and claim what's mine?" Sam didn't waver. "What I know, Richard, is that this farm was built with the hard work of many people, including my relative. If there's something that belongs to me, I'm going to fight for it." The tension between the two was palpable. Richard, feeling that he was losing control of the situation, began to worry not only about the land but also about his reputation. He knew that if this story spread, his image as a powerful farmer could be tarnished. And for Richard, losing the respect of the community would be almost as devastating as losing his lands. Richard, trying to maintain his composure, took a step back and looked at Sam with a calculating gaze. "Very well, Jenkins. Let's see how far you can go with this. But don't think I'm going to let you come out victorious. This land is mine, and you'll regret trying to take it from me." Sam remained calm but felt the tension growing within him. He knew that from that moment on, there was no turning back. He was on a path that would lead to a direct confrontation with Richard, and it could have serious consequences. But he was determined to move forward, not just for himself, but for his family and the workers who trusted him. As he left the main house, Sam took a deep breath. The air was heavy, as if the farm itself was aware of the conflict that was unfolding. He knew Richard wouldn't give up easily, and that the fight ahead would be difficult and full of obstacles. But Sam also knew he had something Richard would never have: the truth and justice on his side. The tension between Sam and Richard was about to explode. As the two faced off in the main house's office, the rest of the auction guests continued to speculate about what was happening between the cowboy and the farm owner. The air of uncertainty permeated the atmosphere, while Richard tried to maintain his mask of control. But inside, he was burning. "Sam," Richard began, trying to keep a diplomatic tone, though the anger was evident in his eyes. "You may have received an inheritance, but that doesn't give you the right to interfere in my business. This farm is mine, and I decide what happens here." Sam, maintaining his characteristic calm, responded firmly. "Richard, I'm not here to cause trouble. I've spent most of my life working on this land, and all I want is to see this farm prosper. If that means I need to protect the legacy my relative helped build, then that's exactly what I'll do." Richard, feeling he was losing control of the situation, tried another approach. "Let's be realistic, Sam. You don't have experience managing land like this. Do you really think you can compete with heavy investors? You've gotten yourself into a game much bigger than you can handle." Sam didn't let himself be intimidated. "Maybe I don't have the experience you do, Richard, but I know this land like the back of my hand. I know what it needs, what the animals need. And more importantly, I know that what you're trying to do, modernize the farm at the expense of everything and everyone, will end up harming what really matters." Richard, unable to contain his frustration, exploded. "You're just a cowboy, Sam. Nothing more than that. Don't fool yourself into thinking that this money will turn you into something you're not." Sam remained silent for a moment, letting Richard's words hang in the air. Then, calmly, he responded, "I've always been a cowboy, and I'm proud of it. But now I'm also someone who has rights to this land, and you can't take that away from me." At that moment, the office door suddenly opened, interrupting the tense conversation. It was one of Richard's lawyers, visibly nervous. "Mr. Montgomery, there's something you need to see immediately." Richard shot an irritated look at the lawyer but decided to follow him. Sam was also invited to accompany them, and the three left the office for the library in the house, where several documents were spread out on the table. The lawyer picked up one of the documents and handed it to Richard, who began reading it quickly. As he read, his expression changed from irritation to surprise and finally to panic. "This can't be right," he muttered, not believing what he was seeing. Sam, sensing an opportunity, approached. "What's going on, Richard?" Richard hesitated before responding, but he knew he could no longer hide the truth. "It seems your relative, Sam, had more rights to these lands than I imagined. This document is a partnership agreement between him and my father, which was never formally annulled. This means you might have a legitimate right to part of my farm." The shock rippled through the room. Sam had suspected that something like this might be at play, but hearing the confirmation from Richard's mouth was a decisive moment. He looked directly at Richard, understanding the gravity of the situation. "This changes everything, Richard. You can't just kick me out of here or ignore what's rightfully mine. I think now we both have to decide how this is going to continue." Richard, feeling cornered, tried to negotiate. "Maybe we can reach an agreement, Sam. I can compensate you financially, or even let you keep working here with a significant raise. But this farm, I can't lose what I've built." Sam shook his head slowly. This isn't about money anymore, Richard. It's about justice. I never wanted us to reach this point, but now it's too late to turn back. You tried to humiliate me to take away the farm I've helped care for so long. Now, I need to protect what's mine, and if that means fighting for my share, then that's what I'll do. Richard fell silent, realizing there was no more convincing Sam. This was a point of no return, and now he would have to face the consequences of his own actions. The tension in the air was thick, as if the entire farm was on the brink of a major change. Both men knew that the conflict between them was far from over and that the real battle was just beginning. The days following the revelation of the documents were marked by a tense silence at Richard's farm. The auction had ended, but the impact of the discoveries remained, reverberating among the workers and residents of the region. Everyone knew that something big was at stake, but few understood the complexity of the situation. Richard, accustomed to being in absolute control, now found himself facing a reality he never imagined. Sam, for his part, remained firm in his decision. He knew the time had come to claim what was rightfully his, but he was also aware that it would mean breaking away from the life he had known for so long. The farm had always been his home, and the idea of engaging in a legal battle against Richard troubled him. However, Richard's relentless stance during their previous conversation convinced him there was no other way out. While Richard tried to find a solution that would preserve his dominance over the farm, Sam sought out a lawyer specializing in property rights. After reviewing the documents, the lawyer confirmed that Sam indeed had a legitimate claim to part of the land. "You have a strong case, Sam," said the lawyer, "but Richard won't give up easily. Prepare for a long battle, and not just in court." Sam nodded, aware that the road ahead would be difficult. Upon returning to the farm, he decided it was time to talk to his family. Sitting around the dinner table, Sam explained everything that had happened in recent weeks. His wife, Martha, and their 2 adult children, John and Emily, listened in silence, absorbing the magnitude of the situation. "Sam," Martha began, a worried expression on her face, "are you sure this is the best thing to do? This farm is all we've ever known. Risking everything, it worries me." Sam held Martha's hand, feeling the weight of her concern. "I know, dear, but Richard forced us into this. I can't keep going knowing that he tried to humiliate us and take away what's ours. This fight isn't just for me, it's for our future." John, who had begun working on the farm alongside his father, intervened. "Dad, if this is what you think is right, I'm with you. We're a family, and we'll face this together." Emily, who had always been more reserved, finally spoke. "I support you too, Dad. This land is part of our history. If this is what we need to do to protect it, then so be it." With his family's unwavering support, Sam felt stronger to face what was to come. In the following days, he began gathering evidence and preparing his case with the help of his lawyer. He knew Richard would use all his influence to try to discredit him, but Sam was determined to move forward. Richard, on the other hand, was in a panic. He knew the legal battle could tarnish his reputation and, worse, could cost him a significant portion of his lands. Determined not to lose, he began spreading rumors among the farmers in the region, insinuating that Sam was trying to take something that didn't belong to him and that he had manipulated the documents. The rumors quickly reached Sam's ears, who was deeply hurt by the realization of how far Richard was willing to go to win. But instead of being discouraged, this only strengthened his resolve. He called a meeting with all the farm workers, explaining the situation and making it clear that he wasn't trying to steal anything, but was only fighting for justice. During the meeting, many workers expressed their support for Sam, recalling the years they had worked together and the respect he had always shown for everyone. "We're with you, Sam," said one of the oldest workers, Joe. "Richard may have the money, but you have our trust." This show of support gave Sam the strength he needed to continue. He knew the battle would be tough, but now he was sure he wasn't alone. The support of his family and the farm workers was all he needed to keep fighting. Meanwhile, Richard felt the pressure mounting. He knew his reputation was at stake and that if he lost this battle, he could lose much more than just land. He was determined to win no matter the cost. But at the same time, he began to realize that he might have underestimated Sam and the power of justice. In the following days, tensions continued to rise. Sam and his lawyer continued to prepare their case, while Richard tried every possible way to discredit Sam and his claim. But the truth was on Sam's side, and he knew that, in the end, justice would prevail. Finally, the day of the trial was approaching, and Richard's farm was about to become the battleground for one of the most intense disputes in the region. Both sides were ready to fight, and the entire community was eagerly waiting to see how this story would unfold. With the tension between Sam and Richard at its peak, the Montgomery farm became the epicenter of a confrontation no one in the community expected to witness. The battle between the humble cowboy and the powerful magnate was the main topic in Austin, and the anticipation for the outcome only grew. Sam, with the support of his family and the farm workers, prepared for what would be a long and exhausting legal battle. He knew Richard would use all the resources at his disposal to make his claim difficult, but he was ready to fight to the end. In his conversations with the lawyer, Sam understood that, despite having a strong case, justice could be slow and, in many ways, unpredictable. The following week, Sam's lawyer officially filed the legal claim on the farm's land. The historical documents, detailing the partnership agreement between Richard's father and Sam's relative, were submitted for review. This move forced Richard to react, and he immediately instructed his legal team to counterattack. Richard's goal was clear: to demoralize Sam and delegitimize his claim. But before the case could be taken to court, Richard decided to make one last move. He scheduled a meeting with Sam at the old farmhouse, where it all began. The two men met in a room that, ironically, contained portraits of their predecessors. Men who, decades ago, had worked side by side to build the property that was now at the center of a bitter dispute. Richard started the conversation, trying to adopt a more conciliatory tone. "Sam, we don't have to let things get to this point. Think carefully about what you're doing. I'm willing to pay you a significant amount to drop this madness and leave the land alone. It doesn't have to be this way." Sam, however, was determined. He looked at Richard with a resolute expression. "Richard, I never wanted this to turn into a war between us, but you left me no choice. This land isn't just a piece of paper or a sum of money. It's part of my history, my family, my work. You tried to humiliate me, tried to take everything I had. But I won't back down anymore." Richard, realizing that Sam was firm in his decision, could no longer contain his anger. He abruptly stood up from his chair, slamming his fists on the table. "You're ruining everything, Sam. Do you really think you can win? Do you think you can take on someone like me?" Sam remained seated, maintaining the calm that characterized him. "I don't know if I can win, Richard, but I know I won't stop fighting for what's right. And if that means facing you, then that's exactly what I'll do." With that, the meeting ended in a stalemate. Richard, furious, made it clear that he would not give up an inch of land without fighting to the last resource. Sam, on the other hand, left the room with the conviction that he had made the right decision, even knowing the challenges that still lay ahead. The following weeks were marked by intense legal discussions, with both sides gathering evidence and preparing their arguments. The community watched closely, divided between supporting the traditional cowboy or the powerful landowner. However, as the case progressed, something unexpected began to happen. News of Richard's behavior during the auction, his attempt to humiliate Sam, and the rumors he spread began to backfire on him. Many people in the community, who once admired him, began to see Richard in a new light, as a man driven by greed and willing to do anything to maintain his power. Finally, the day of the trial arrived. The courtroom was packed, with members of the community, journalists, and curious onlookers eagerly waiting for the verdict. Sam's and Richard's lawyers presented their arguments, but what really caught the judge's attention were the documents proving the partnership agreement between the two men's predecessors. After hours of deliberation, the judge finally ruled. In a decision that shocked everyone, he recognized the validity of Sam's claim, granting him a significant portion of the farm's land. The decision was a monumental victory for Sam, who, upon hearing the verdict, felt a wave of relief and satisfaction. He had fought for justice and, against all odds, had prevailed. Richard, devastated by the defeat, left the courtroom without saying a word. He knew his reputation had been severely damaged and that his position as the most powerful man in the region was in jeopardy. On the other hand, Sam, though victorious, remained as humble as ever. In the months that followed, Sam began planning his new life as a landowner. He decided to use his portion of the farm to continue the work he had always loved, but now with the freedom to do things his way. The farm thrived under his leadership, with the workers feeling the difference in working for someone who valued every person and every piece of land. Richard, for his part, was forced to adapt to a new reality. Although he still owned a large part of the land, he lost the absolute control he had so valued. Over time, he withdrew from business, leaving the management of the farm to one of his sons, who adopted a more conciliatory and cooperative approach with Sam. The story of Sam and Richard became a legend in the region, an example of how justice can prevail even in the most difficult situations. Sam proved that, with determination and courage, it was possible to face adversity and come out victorious, without losing one's integrity. And so, with his family by his side, Sam lived the rest of his days in peace, knowing he had done the right thing. The farm he helped build and protect continued to thrive, a legacy for future generations.